Welcome to Athletes and Entrepreneurs, the Alumni Journey. I'm Rob Finkelstein, founder and CEO of Alumni Direct. We've created a platform to help athletes and other alumni to network and connect within these groups and giving them a place to tap into resources for health and career services and financial. But this podcast, it's all about, we interview former collegiate and professional athletes, and we talk about their journey through sports, their transition out of sports, ultimately into successful business leadership and entrepreneurship. And just we're so excited today. We're jumping into another sport. So I always love when we get a new sport. So excited to have Steven Webster. How you doing, Steven?
Very well, Rob. Nice to meet you, and excited to be on the show.
That's great. Yeah, we are too. So Steven, his background was, I'm going to say it right, karate, because like people always say karate, but I'm going to say karate because that's the right proper. Right?
You watch Cobra Kai, yeah.
Yeah, well, Cobra Kai, I did, great show. I love that one. So anyway, he was over in Edinburgh College, and he was he was in the sport. Ultimately, he got out of it, but transitioned to coaching, which ultimately is kind of leading to what he does today, which we'll get into a little bit later on. Once he was done there, he also got into the tech space. He started a consultancy company, which had a lot of success, ultimately sold it to Adobe and Microsoft. And then today he is the founder and CEO of Asensei. And so we're going to hear all about that in a little bit while. But I always like to talk, Steven, about how did sports growing up, like as a youth, shape you leading up into college?
I mean, I grew up in a field. I was constantly, as soon as it was light, I was in the backyard and I was over the fence and into the football field, the soccer field. I grew up in Scotland, and so you kind of grow up playing the same sports. You play a lot of soccer, you run around. But I also, I swam, I played for the school for a whole bunch of different sports. I windsurfed every weekend. I often describe myself as I was never picked first in any sport, but I was usually picked second or third, when you're doing that awkward, like, pick the teams. Sport was just a natural part of growing up for me. That's what I did. But the sports that really took, or the activities that really took, were martial arts. My parents signed me up for a judo class when I was 7, which very quickly, by the time I was, I think, 8, I was in a jiu-jitsu class and spent my entire childhood training jiu-jitsu. I was a black belt by the age of 14. And then, really martial arts was the thing that I was disproportionately good at and utterly obsessed with. And then when I went to university, as I'm sure we'll talk about, my jiu-jitsu instructor was like, open another club in the association. We'll have a club at the university. And the style of jiu-jitsu that I practiced, Japanese jiu-jitsu, wasn't competitive. If you competed, somebody would die at the end. It was, martial art. But I really wanted to compete in martial arts. I was like, well, which martial arts are there at the university? And really it was judo or karate. Those were the two. I was like, I love to kick. So I'm going to join the karate club. And, that was the transition. But yeah, sports were hugely important growing up.
Yeah, I think it definitely makes an impact for sure. It's interesting. I just did, we had our 100th episode, so we're real excited. We just dropped that. And in the episode, my son interviewed me like I'm doing.
I remember you saying, yeah.
Yeah, but it was cool, but it really stuck with me just talking about it, and just for me being a runner and just the impact that it made for me, just, growing up and ultimately into my sales career and to what I do today in entrepreneurship. So let's talk a little bit about transition out of sports. We talked a little bit offline about it, but I don't know if I'm sure it's the same everywhere. So is that a major issue over in Europe and Scotland, specifically in Scotland, of just when athletes are done, whether it's soccer or karate or whatever?
I mean, so I'll answer a couple of different ways. I think it's not the same at university sport. I mean, when I moved to the US, university sport, I remember early on in the days of Asensei, flying out to Michigan and meeting the football program at Michigan. I was like, I've been to Barcelona's stadium. I've been to Old Trafford for Manchester United. I was like, this is a nicer setup than Barcelona and Man United have. So that kind of scale of professionalism in college sport doesn't exist. And so, if you play sport, even if you're playing for the first team or competing for the first team, as I did in karate, you're nowhere near professional. If you want to compete professionally, play professionally, or train for Olympics, you're probably in another club as well as your university club that's connected to those leagues and infrastructures. So I don't think college athletes necessarily have that same transitioning out of college. What am I going to do now? But I think it's certainly true for, in my job at Asensei, we get to work with pro athletes, Olympic athletes, and we definitely see the same. One of our advisors very early on in the company was a woman by the name of Helen Glover, one of the most decorated Olympians in Team GB. She's competed, I think, at 3 Olympics now in rowing. And she actually did transition out of the sport, but then transitioned back in again in the pandemic. She's like, well, I've had kids, but, if everyone's training at home, I can compete again. I can train at home as well. So I've definitely watched other athletes, in our, under the Asensei umbrella, if you like, who have competed at, say, Olympic level, really struggle with that transition out of the sport and what do you do next.
So did you see, like, was there, we always talk about like education. So like, was there efforts, whether within the university club or the outside the club that you mentioned, of just kind of maybe ways that, whether it's workshops or classes to kind of guide these athletes once they are done?
I haven't seen it as much. I've seen that more here in the US than I have in the UK, where, certainly in the US, and maybe it's just the nature of where I am in my journey and where I lived in that part of the journey. But, certainly in the venture ecosystem, there's a lot of former athletes turned entrepreneurs, former athletes turned investors who are trying to help other athletes in that journey as well. How do they help athletes become investors, and how do they help them raise their own funds or move into the sport? For me, coming back to, my shift, when I joined the university, I was, competing. I then captained the club. I then became the full-time coach of the club. And so my transition was very much from, I don't want to compete anymore, but I want to stay in the sport as a coach. And I coached for 10 years at University of Edinburgh. But in the latter years, I kind of knew that 10 was going to be my limit. It was a big commitment alongside a full-time job and building a company. And as you mentioned, that was at the time I was building the company that we sold to Adobe. And I'd made this proclamation when we won our first national championship that we were going to win a treble, that we'd win 3 in a row. And when we won 3 in a row, I should have said 5, but I said 10. I was in my 20s. So I was full of hubris. I was like, we're going to win 10 in a row. And so it became this target that I had to hit. But I knew when I hit it, like, that's my retiring from coaching the university club. So I had a period of years where I was thinking about how do I transition the club to a new set of coaches. And so that was the next part of my journey, is like, how do I coach the coaches? How do I leave a system behind, and how do I leave a method behind? And what I'm really most proud of, I did move to California with 10 consecutive national championship wins for my club under my belt. But the club went on to win 8 more. And the 8 that they won, the majority of the coaches I'd coached as students, most of them since white belt. So, I really like that kind of idea of talent development, and how can you kind of reach back and help the next generation of coaches as well as athletes. And, the company Asensei, that's where the name comes from. It's this idea that we have this obligation to reach back and help others that want to follow in the same journey that we've been on before.
Yeah, that's a great testament. When you can coach others and then build that foundation like you're talking about, I think that's what mentorship's all about. I talk about that as people took me under their wing, and I try to do the same thing. That's what we're trying to do as a company with Alumni Direct, is just to guide people and help them in their journey. So that's cool. I like that approach. So one of the things that we always talk about is networking and connecting, and just the importance of it, and especially while you're still in your sport. So talk a little bit about your experience with that, maybe even back to your college days, kind of leading up to some of the things you do today.
Yeah, I mean, there's a number of different things that come to mind. I mean, the first is as a head coach at University of Edinburgh. I mean, it's a prestigious university that anyone around the world, if you call them and say, "Would you like to come to University of Edinburgh for a weekend? We'll pay for your flights and accommodation, and you get to teach the sport that you love." Usually, the answer is yes. And so, the first thing I would share is I had this ability to bring to my club the instructors that I could only have dreamed of training with, by kind of using the resource of the club to fly instructors in from all over the world and build this network of instructors. Not always in karate either, but in ancillary, training systems, other martial arts, typically. Through that network of of coaches, I became part of another network, an underlying network, because what would happen is every time I brought an instructor, say from Australia, to come and train us, Patrick McCarthy, there would be 7 or 8 other instructors around the UK who I would say, "Do you want to split the flight costs and split the accommodation costs, and we'll tour him around the UK or Europe for a couple of weeks, and we'll kind of share the costs." So now there was this like next layer network of instructors like me who were like branching out and studying with others. One of those instructors is now my CTO. I've known Bill for over 30 years, as a martial artist, and he and I would we would bring instructors to the UK together. We would get together in between their visits and train together. And then when I decided I wanted to start a technology company around kind of movement recognition and sport coaching, this guy that I knew from that network was my first pick for my CTO. And then I think the last thing I would share is just my alumni network. I had the incredible fortune over 10 years of teaching. My class would be about 200 students at the start of the year. It tapered off towards the end of the year as it got tougher. But 200 students a year, that's a big network of students who have been through a 4 to 7 year program with you, depending on whether they were undergrad or postgrad students. And that's a worldwide network of students who, and you and I talked about this a little bit, anytime I meet up with them in some random city in the world, inevitably the conversation will trail back to, I learned more on the mat in karate than I did in my law degree or my medical degree or my engineering degree. And so many of the lessons that they've kind of carried forward and the friendships that they've formed, and the relationships. I mean, I've got, there's Edinburgh University Karate Club children now between students. That was always going to happen. There's like a really interesting selection of networks that I'm still a part of today and still tap into today.
Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, and that's, we try to do that. Like we talk about just the alumni communities, and whether it's, from the college side of things, whether it's from like an athlete community center, it's great that, you're able to tap into that. And we highly recommend that. I think with athletes, it's just, there are people out there that want to help. And,
Right.
I kind of, my approach to networking, connecting, even alumni engagement is just, kind of paying it forward. Like, how do you help people? And it's all going to come around. I mean, but I think sometimes athletes are maybe, whether it's being too proud or whatever, and just not knowing what to do, they might not ask for it. But you just gave some great examples of just, tapping in. I mean, here's, people that you taught, and you're just all kind of coming back together. I mean, that's awesome.
The band is back together again. That's right.
For sure. So this is something I've added to each podcast, and I like to ask these 2 questions. So the first question is, what advice would you give to freshman Steven? So going back to like college, so what advice would you give to yourself as a freshman?
A freshman athlete or a freshman student?
I guess it could be both. I mean, were they at different times or?
No. I just wanted to, the advice might be more specific. I mean, I think for me, going to college, going to university, even though I was like very academic, that's why I was going there. I was going there to get a degree. Super important to me that I had an outlet and that I had a sport, and that it was a sport that I could compete in. I think I've always believed that competition puts you outside your comfort zone. It can be as uncomfortable as I'm going to put a gum shield in my mouth and somebody's going to throw punches at my head, or it can just be, uncomfortable like kayaking, and you just don't want to let the team down, or drown, I guess.
Yeah, that's an important one. Yeah, let's not.
I know. all the kayakers are going to be emailing like it's more dangerous than karate. So, I mean, I think that would be my biggest advice to anyone is like find a sport, and it doesn't have to be, like me. I found a tangential sport. I'd never competed in karate before. I didn't know karate, but because I was already a black belt in jiu-jitsu, it was something that I felt like I would be able to get on the team. Like I've got the core skills that I'd be able to get on the team. And I think, why I think, we talk a lot in the business world about, work-life balance, or like, I like to think more about like work-life harmony. It's not necessarily none of one and all of the other.
Yeah.
But I think that's a really important lesson you learn is like being able to have that outlet of sport, being able to have a community that's not just your work community. And then just, learning something physical as well as learning something intellectual. I think just satiates us in a way that if we're just buried in books, we don't. So for any freshman student, um, athlete or otherwise, because again, you look at athletes in the US, and like these kids that are showing up to college year one, I'm like, my God, you look like a pro athlete already. Whereas I was teaching students who would show up for my first class and they didn't own any workout gear. They were showing up in jeans to take part in a karate class because they'd never really done physical exercise before. And so, yeah, I think it's super important that you have a sport or fitness activity alongside your academics.
Yeah, and now let's fast forward to senior Steven. Any advice to him?
Just do it. I think there's a company
Hey, isn't it Nike? Come on, we can't.
Yeah. There is no finish line. Yeah, I mean, I think I don't know. It's advice to myself, but it's advice I would give other people that, like, if you really think you can do something, if there's a niche that you want to scratch, like scratch it. Don't put it off. Kind of have the courage to do big things, but be very aware of what you're signing up for. Everything hard is hard, and I think there's a culture of like being an entrepreneur will be easy. I'll just go and raise money and I'll flip my company in 2 years, but it doesn't work like that. Every overnight success took 10 years. So is this something you want to do for 10 years? And if it is, go for it.
There you go. All right. We got the good advice there. So now let's talk about your transition. We've talked about things. So we're going to talk about your transition as a club athlete, college athlete to coaching, and talk a little bit about, what you went through. I mean, you're competing this whole time. Now all of a sudden you're kind of flipping it a little bit.
I mean, it was a big shift, maybe even more so in martial arts. Being a coach, being a sensei, right, is quite honorific. And, I didn't necessarily feel I was ready for it. The university came to me and asked me, would I become the full-time coach of the club? Which was an honor, and it was like quite intimidating. I'd never, done that before. And so, yeah, I mean, I would say the initial transition, it was the fear of saying yes. It's like, can I do this? Can I really coach a club at university level? And when I took the club over, the club was on its knees. I mean, the club was pretty close to just folding and not being a club. And so it wasn't even, do you want to take over a winning club? It's like, do you want to turn around a club that's really important to you but might not exist in 12 months' time? It was like a turnaround CEO. So yeah, it was a big transition in that regard. And listen, I was in my 20s. I was learning as I go, and I can look back and tell a lot of great stories about all the things I got right. But I was experimenting. I was like testing and learning. And I think one thing, I guess, being an entrepreneur, I challenge orthodoxy a lot. And you don't challenge orthodoxy in martial arts. Like, this is the way it's always been done. But that's not the way I did things. I was we were kind of the Strictly ballroom of the karate world. We were kind of doing everything very differently to everyone else. And that served me well, just taking a very different approach to how we were going to build a club and coach a club and teach a club and compete. But yeah, it was a big transition. I was definitely seen as an outsider. But we kind of had a mantra of, let's let the medals speak for themselves.
There you go.
So back on the score.
Were you doing like the tech consulting and stuff while you were still as a coach too?
Yeah, I kind of joke that, like, I worked in the tech industry to pay for my karate coaching. The stipend from the university was, I think it maybe covered my gas to competitions every weekend, but it certainly wasn't a salary. And again, that's just the nature of university sport. Anyone that's coaching university sport in the UK, you're a volunteer coach, pretty
Right.
much. I didn't get Jim Harbaugh's salary, that's for sure, coaching at the
No,
University of Edinburgh
no.
Cricket Club. So yeah, right at the time I took on the club was right at the time I graduated. I was a hardware engineer, I was a chip designer for about 4 years before becoming a software engineer. And so, I was new in my career as I started coaching the club. And then I had the courage to start a consultancy, probably about 4 years into teaching the club. And so many of the lessons that I was learning on the mat, and so many of the lessons I was learning building teams and etc. Those were filtering into. I could also build a company, and I could also challenge orthodoxy in this corner of the tech industry. And so, my life has always been this interweave of the lessons learned on the mat show up in the business, and the lessons in the business, show up on the mat, and then the two things kind of support each other. So yeah, I built and sold the first company while I was a coach, and then ultimately, when I left the club with the 10th championship, it was with Adobe. Adobe were like, if you want to keep going up at Adobe, maybe you should come out to California to HQ. And so I kind of moved out to California to work out of the San Jose and San Francisco offices.
So what advice, a couple words of advice would you give? I talk about, we talk about the athlete transitioning out of sports, and it sounds like yours, some are harder than others. It seems like the whole martial arts background is probably key. Like you talk about like life lessons. It seems like maybe more so than some other sports. But anyway, these athletes that are, whether it's mental health or financial literacy, what advice would you give to them?
I mean, I think it's very much about like you have to be motivated by something that motivates you, right? You have to find an intrinsic motivation. You have to be excited about the thing. And I've had the good fortune in my current company in Asensei of working with world class athletes who have, a lot of rowers for some reason. Indoor rowing was a sport and a community that we were a big part of early in the formation of the company. I mentioned Helen Glover already, and Helen transitioned out of the sport and I was like, screw it. I can still be one of the best Olympians in the world. I'm going back. And, she went back at the last Olympics at Tokyo. Another Olympian that comes to mind from Team USA was Hans Strasnia. And I met Hans just before Rio. So he was going to the Rio Olympics. His wife, she'd been at the London Olympics and she transitioned out the sport already. He knew Rio was going to be like his only Olympics. He didn't want to train for 2020 or 2022, as it turned out, right? But Hans and his wife, they moved into real estate. They became realtors and they're like super successful realtors now. But with that kind of Olympic mindset, and there's a phrase that the Olympic Committee has, the definition of Olympism is to know the joy and reward from effort. And I love that. And I think that really kind of speaks to, if you're an Olympian, if you know Olympism, then you know the joy and reward from effort. And that effort might have been, can you and seven other guys shift a boat across 2,000 meters of water as quicker than anyone else? Or can you sell real estate in the Bay Area better than anyone else? And, those two things are the same. And then another athlete that comes to mind, Eric Murray, who's one of the top rowers of all time. He's known as one half of the Kiwi pair. And when Eric retired, we met him somewhat serendipitously as he was retiring and making that transition out of being an Olympic athlete. And now he coaches with Asensei. He has a following, like hundreds of thousands of people have downloaded apps that they connect their rowing machine to. And Eric Murray, former Olympian, is their coach, and he's impacting so many individuals' lives now as a coach. who they look up to as an inspirational athlete. And that's the definition of sensei all over again. The word sensei means, it's two characters, a person and before. So it means, it doesn't mean master or, some honorific. It means a person who's gone before. And so this idea that, Eric Murray has been on a journey and now he's turning around and looking at others that are like on some small part of that journey, because they're not all going to be as successful as he was in the Olympics, but he's reaching back and he's helping them along. And so, that's what excites me now. So I went from being a competitor to a captain to a coach to coaching the coaches. And now here I am with a digital technology company that allows coaches worldwide across any sport to scale the reach and impact of their knowledge, and just kind of elevate the next generation of people. Because we just have this belief that if you can unlock someone's athletic potential, you can unlock their human potential. And so technology is the only thing that's ever let us do things like that at any level of scale.
Yeah, yeah. No, there's a lot there. You packed in a lot on that one. So let's talk about you've gone on this journey in entrepreneurship. First with the consulting company that you ultimately sold, and then today what you're doing with Asensei. But how do you feel the athlete skill set kind of translates into your journey to to founding these companies as an entrepreneur?
It's a great question. I mean, I think it's a really good question. The first part of that athlete journey, I guess, is just belief, right? There's a point in that athlete journey where nobody believes in you except yourself, or maybe, and this is actually, maybe I should contradict myself, or there's a coach who sees something in you that no one else sees. But there's that initial spark of belief of like, you know what? Why not me? Why couldn't I be on the podium? Or why couldn't I be an entrepreneur? Why couldn't I start this company? Because most of us listen more to the voice that says, no, you can't, than the voice that says, yes, you can. And I think that's one of the things we learn in any sport, where we've been able to go from zero to some level of competence, is that hard work gets you a long way. It's not all talent. Now, Messi's pretty talented, but there's also an awful lot of hard work in there to get to there. So I would say that's the first thing from the athlete mindset, is just that sense of belief and that understanding of hard work. Like, you got to put in the reps, you got to do the work. And a lot of that work, I used to love that Under Armour ad. Is like, I can't quite remember what the ad was, but it was the work that athletes do in the dark. I think it was kind of Michael Phelps getting up early, and that's it, right? Is like all that hard work happens in the dark. And it's the same with company building. If you're in the digital health, digital fitness industry now, probably in the last 12 months, you've heard of Asensei. Maybe the last 18, 24 months, you've heard of Asensei. You know who they are, you know what we do. But we're 10 years old, So it's do the hard work in the dark.
Yeah, no, that's good. Yeah, I mean, I think it's we talk a lot about people want to hire athletes, because of the just the drive, the determination, the teamwork, all these things you were just talking about too. And I think it's important for athletes to realize that when your sport is over, when your playing days are over, you got a long time ahead of you, and just tap into your skills. People want to be around that and definitely use them. And you're a great example of the success that you've had, in your journey of entrepreneurship. So let's talk about Asensei. I mean, you've told me about it. It's a really cool, the things that you're doing. So I always say kind of like that corporate commercial, so to speak, but I'd love to have you share with our audience some of the great things that you're doing with the company.
I mean, I just encourage everyone to ask themselves a question: what if human movement was something a machine could understand? We've got machines that can understand speech, so we can speak to them and they can answer us back, and they can do a whole bunch of stuff for us in between us asking a question and them answering us back. And what if the same was true for human movement? What if a machine had perception to look at you running or playing baseball or playing golf or doing your physical therapy? What if that machine could look at you, see you, recognize what you were doing, understand what you were doing, know how to intervene and when to intervene, so that you could get better at doing that thing? And what if that voice in your ear or over your shoulder wasn't the voice of some cold, soulless machine, But with Steph Curry when you're playing basketball, Michael Phelps when you're swimming, Eric Murray when you're rowing, the list goes on. So that's what Asensei does. We provide all of the ingredients that allow a fitness brand or a health brand to put that kind of technology into their products. So quickly, we really do three things. The first thing we do is motion capture. So whether it's using sensors in your sports clothing or it's using a camera that can see you in the room you're in, from the TV, from your phone, we capture your skeleton in real time. We can see, hundreds of times a second what position your body's in 3D space. The second thing we do is what we call movement recognition. So we can tell, are you doing a front squat? Are you pitching a baseball? Are you doing some rehab exercise in PT? Are you throwing a roundhouse kick? We recognize what you're doing. But more importantly, we recognize what you're doing and how well you're doing it against the criteria of a particular coach or a particular governing body or a particular physiotherapist. So I can now be like, I can see that Rob is throwing a roundhouse kick, but he's not pivoting on his back foot. And for someone at his level, that's the mistake we should pick and fix next, is pivot on your back foot. And then the final thing we do is what we call coaching intelligence. We bring athletic intelligence to artificial intelligence. So coaching intelligence is, how do we as coaches in the moment make a decision about what we're going to fix now? Am I going to cue you, correct you, stop you, intervene? Am I just going to remember that and tell you at the end of practice? Or am I going to remember that until the next time we do this exercise and tell you before we start? Hey, Rob, we're going to do roundhouse kicks today, but I want you to remember, pivot on that back foot so your heel points at your opponent. And so we call that coaching intelligence. And so all of these ingredients we give to other brands. And some of them are brands your listeners probably know. So we're working with Chris Hemsworth's fitness company, Center. If anyone's ever used an interchangeable dumbbell from Power Block, that essentially now recognizes you pick up that power block, what weight you've got, what exercise you're doing, and how well you're doing it. For some of the other sports, I'm sure many of your listeners that were athletes turned entrepreneurs have been tied up to a Vertimax system to train their vertical jump or train their explosiveness. Vertimax are launching an app powered by Asensei that lets you measure your vertical and give you coaching and feedback on how well you're doing that particular jump or movement so you can improve your vertical. So fitness, health, sport, human performance, these are all kind of the types of applications that are putting our movement recognition technology inside of them.
That sounds really incredible. And how does it, so you're talking about like the coaches, like how does the coach's voice like basically come on to the issue has been identified, and now the coach is going to help with the correction, but like how does that parlay into that person actually telling it?
Yeah, so part of the configuring, we give our customers a lot of flexibility in configuration. So we can, they can configure things like, when I see Rob doing a certain exercise, if he makes these two mistakes, which one do you want to coach first? And if you want to coach it and intervene with a coaching voice, that can be a number of different things. It could just be pre-recorded audio that we've kind of got in the can, if you like, and it's just a recording of the coach saying, eyes forward and lift your shoulders. That might just be literally an audio recording, but Asensei will play that audio recording just when you need to hear it. But increasingly, and this is nuts, it's magic, Asensei can generate the text that a coach should say. So basically, we don't spit out an audio file, we just spit out the words, the text. And then you've probably seen or heard some of these AI clones where you and I can record our voice just speaking, for 20 minutes, and then you can create a clone of that voice. So we can now create clones of an athlete or a celebrity trainer's voice, and we can kind of put our hand up their back and make them speak, right? So when I was raising money for the company in the very beginnings, you're always making VCs imagine, right? It's like, I want you to imagine a world in which my son is playing basketball in California, and as he's practicing his 3-point shots, the voice of Steph Curry is using his name And if he makes a shot or misses a shot, Steph's acknowledging that he made it or missed it, or drop your elbow in a little bit more again. Great, right there. That's where I want it. So imagine that. So we're able to power those kind of experiences with not just AI clone voices, but if people want to follow me on LinkedIn, there's an AI clone video of me coaching in Spanish. Now, I do not speak Spanish. But some of the AI video cloning can just take a video of me and change the way my lips are moving to match the words and make me speak in other languages. So now you can imagine a video of a celebrity, and it's like they're there. And I guess the one last example I'll share with you is there's a company called Lightsport, and Lightsport, you put on a Meta Quest headset, and you see your own room. You're not in some completely virtual environment. You see your own room through the headset, but you then also see a trainer in your room that's not actually there, but they're in your room. And we did a pilot with those guys so that trainer is speaking to you. So you've got a holographic trainer in your room coaching you and giving you feedback. And it's wild. That's going to be on your Ray-Bans pretty soon. And it's,
Wow, that's incredible. Hey, how does it? Like, I'm just curious. Like, from the celebrity standpoint, do they get paid royalties? How does that work?
NIL, yeah. I mean, it's a great example of why I think there's been so much. We saw the actor strikes, right? And it's like, hey, we know that AI is going to replace us. You could take 20 minutes of video of me from a movie and make a digital version of myself. So I want to own my digital likeness. So yeah, I mean, it's a big thing in the industry right now is like licensing of name, image, likeness, and use of that for AI. I think it was James Earl Jones, the voice of Darth Vader. He sold his voice, but he sold his voice to Disney so that they can use his voice after his death. And that'll just be something like we've just been speaking about, just text to speech of Darth Vader. It's crazy.
Wow. And so how does it? Do the people pay for it? Like, how does it work? What's the model as far as like I'm the athlete or my kid's the athlete that's getting this training? Is it that person that's paying like they pay a membership fee? Do they like what is how does all that work?
It depends on the customer. I mean, our different customers have different business models. So PowerBlock sell a dumbbell, and they may choose to sell that dumbbell with weight recognition as just a feature that's a feature of the dumbbell, or maybe you're paying a subscription for that. Chris Hemsworth's company Center, you're paying a monthly subscription to that product, and so as they bring on other features and capabilities, perhaps including Asensei, I guess the opportunity we offer companies like that is, do you want to use our technology to differentiate your product against competitors, or do you want to use our technology as a premium offering so that you can charge your customers more? So, from our perspective, our customers pay us to license and use our technology in their products, but how they choose to the business model they choose for their product depends on, are they a connected fitness company? Are they selling hardware? Are they selling an app? Are they selling a physical product like a dumbbell or a Vertimax? Is it part of your PT online? We're doing some stuff around virtual PT now as well. So, it's the great thing about any digital transformation is it unlocks new business models that, you create a different kind of value and you can capture and share that value with the ecosystem.
Yeah, wow, it's amazing technology, sure is. So, how can people find you?
Find us on LinkedIn. That's where, if am I allowed to mention LinkedIn? Alumni Direct.
Yes.
Find us on Alumni Direct. But
we'll get there someday. But like LinkedIn's good.
No, but LinkedIn. Find me on LinkedIn or find Asensei on LinkedIn, and that tends to be like, we love to just give people constant peeks behind the curtain of what we're working on and what's coming down the pipe, and so we tend to share there first because that's where our network is, and that's where that's where our networks are that are public facing. And so, that's probably the best place to find us. And if you can find your way onto our newsletter, we have a monthly newsletter. If you can find your way onto that, we'll keep you up to speed with all the products that are launching. But you'll see lots of products this year with that Asensei badge on them.
Okay. Great. And then is there a website too for Sensei or?
Yeah, Asensei.ai. If you look at my name in the bottom corner, I always put it beside my name so people can go and type
There
it
you
in.
go. We'll make sure we put that in the show notes and all that.
Uh,
This has been pretty great. It really it's a cool technology, and I think people should definitely reach out and tap into it. You can find us at alumnidirect.com. You can find us. The show is on our YouTube channel, as well as across all the podcast networks. And each week we just have great information from athletes like Steven, and just we really want to make an impact in this space. And I think there's a lot of athletes that do struggle. And if we could, I always help if we can help at least one. I mean, hopefully we can help a lot of them, but definitely tune into those. You can also find us on X and Twitter and all those different areas. But again, thank you so much, Stephen. It's been awesome spending time with you today.
likewise, thanks so much.
It's my pleasure.